Episode 78, The Call to Freedom.
Welcome to Longing for More, where Christians come to strengthen their faith, revive their soul, and learn to live their lives with a sense of fulfillment and peace. Listen each week to learn how to incorporate your faith into your daily activities, stop wandering through life feeling empty and unfulfilled, and begin to live your more. Let's get started.
Today's show is, without a doubt, the most powerful show that I've recorded to date. I have an amazing guest with me who, her story alone is just incredible in how God laid a calling on her heart and just led her step by step to step into this huge mission that He has for her on her life. But then also just the work that she does and how powerful of an impact it will have on every person that touches her work. Her mission is to end human trafficking in South Dakota and the impact that that will have on lives and the people who are caught up in this trap of human trafficking, which I'll be honest, I knew very, very little about and still have a lot to learn. But I encourage you to stay until the very end because it is a message you will not want to miss. But before we get into that, I just want to say that if you're listening to this the week the show is released, which is on November 12th, I hope that you'll consider coming to my Connecting with Your More retreat on Saturday, November 16th. It's just a 3-hour in the morning session. It's going to be a beautiful session. And if you want to learn more about it, go to vannajohnson.com/retreat to learn more and to register. I think you will be glad that you checked it out and was able to attend that amazing workshop. So without further ado, let's get started with our interview. Hey everyone, I am so excited. I have an amazing guest with me today. She fits perfectly with the Longing for More prototype that we talk about. She's someone who heard a call from God and answered that call. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself, but today I have Becky Rasmussen, and she's the executive director to the Call to Freedom program. I have to be honest, I didn't know anything about it before we met. She spoke at a women's group that I was at here in Pierre, probably a month ago almost now, and I was just so drawn in both by her story, but then also by what she does. And I really want to share this with you. This is such an important message on both ends. And so welcome, Becky. Thank you for joining me today. Let's start out. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, please.
Sure. My name is Becky Rasmussen, and as Vanna told you, I'm the executive director for an organization called Call to Freedom, which is an anti-human trafficking group that offers supportive services to those that have been victimized by human trafficking. And the program has really evolved over the course of the last just under 4 years that we've been functioning in the state of South Dakota. And we, as we've seen the needs within communities, as we've worked with survivors that have come out of human trafficking from South Dakota, we've really evolved our services. We have a housing project that houses individuals who are coming out of trafficking situations, and primarily women. We are also seeing males that are coming out of labor trafficking and sex trafficking situations that we're starting to serve. And so we're revisiting some of our services to make sure that we're not missing anybody who's been victimized by human trafficking. And so we have 15 staff that now work. And when we started, you heard a little bit about my journey, where we started, where I was working 2 jobs and to start Call to Freedom. And we were a nonprofit as of January 2016, and God called me to this. And as I've journeyed through it, He has equipped us. He has given us this amazing favor to be able to do this work, so that we can do His work, so that we can be that person that when victims think that they don't have support, that they do, and that we empower them to hopefully someday have their own voice. Until then, we become their voice and their advocate for them, to get them out of those really dark situations. And so I have the privilege of starting the organization and then also facilitating the organization and running it I also have one daughter who is, so I was a single mom when I started this. She's an amazing young girl. She's off to college now, so I'm an empty nester. And I'm so grateful because, as we know, calls take a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice. And there was lots of times where I feel like I sacrificed maybe a little bit as a mom, but I'm grateful that she's turned out to be this amazing young lady who is finding herself and paving her own way in her direction of who she wants to be and who God's calling her to be. So
That's so beautiful. So, yeah, it's amazing when we get to see how our children grow up and they get their wings and they start following their callings. Tell us, and again, this isn't the whole focus of the interview, but it's so important. It's kind of like sex trafficking has gotten to be more and more in the news. We're becoming more aware that this is going on. And like I said in the intro, I've been kind of oblivious to this. And I think maybe there's a little part of me that just has a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that this could really happen in the world today. We're supposed to be better than this.
Yeah.
So tell us what it looks like and what we should be looking for to if we see flags or whatever, what can we do about that?
Sure. A community that is in the dark will not think that this is happening. And so God needs to rise up voices that shed light into the darkness. And so that's part of my call, is to talk about what this looks like within South Dakota and in other communities. And when we started this just under 4 years ago, I never anticipated the need to be so great. But one of the things that there's a stat, 3% of victims are ever identified. That means that 97% of victims go unidentified in human trafficking. We talk a lot about sex trafficking, and that is happening within the state of South Dakota. And it happens in many different ways. Events, when you have large events that are in our communities, and two of those that happen in the state of South Dakota is our Sturgis Rally and also hunting season. And anytime you have large groups of people that come to any large events, you're going to have that facilitation of criminal activity, from drugs to human trafficking. And a lot of the drugs and the human trafficking are intertwined. It's the same organized crime that is doing both of them. And so events are one of those ways that they come in, and we have major interstates. So when we have 90, I-90, and 29 that are going through our communities, that means that trafficking is coming through our communities, which brings me to the second type of trafficking, which is transit trafficking, which means they will come through our communities. They will take them to a destination wherever people are buying, the demand is, human trafficking is going to be facilitated. And so traffickers are the ones who actually are the business facilitators of this. They bring the demand, whatever the demand wants, they find that product. And so transit trafficking is different organized crimes. It's family members, it's cartel, it is gangs, onesie, twosie gangs, organized gangs. Anytime there's this ability to make money, this is how this is facilitated. And so transit trafficking is where they meet somebody within one state, and we are a perfect state for it to happen. Just as you said, I can't believe that this would happen in our state. Why would they come to South Dakota? This is a great state, great people. Because we're naive and we think that everybody has good intentions, which makes Midwestern girls a really good, and boys, that prime candidate to be recruited into human trafficking. And so transit trafficking is where they go and find vulnerable populations. They will come into South Dakota. They will build relationships with their victim. A lot of people, when I speak, we talk about trafficking, or Taken, the movie Taken. And I say, raise your hand. How many of you have seen the movie Taken? And people raise their hand. And I said, that's not how it happens typically in the state of South Dakota. A lot of times it's really strategic and how a trafficker will target their victim. They will then groom their victim, and then they will recruit their victim, which means they build a relationship with them. And it's facilitated in a couple different ways. It could be a mom figure. It could be a best friend that's the same gender as them, who builds a relationship. They build trust with them. Once they've established that trust, the next step is then they'll introduce them to the trafficker, because they've already got them convinced that you can trust me, I care about you. And then the trafficker takes it to the next level, becomes a boyfriend, becomes a father figure, somebody that they begin to trust as well. And then we'll take them across other state lines and facilitate this trafficking. So we've had clients that have it started in South Dakota and they've been taken over to cross lines to Chicago, and a knife has been held to their neck and a gun to their head and forced to do things that nobody should ever have to do. And then the fear factor is set in. If you tell, nobody's going to believe you. If you tell, I'll hurt your family, I'll hurt your children. Those threats of force are very, very real. And so those tactics that traffickers use isn't just the kidnapping tactics. It's more of that grooming, recruiting, because it's a power and control. They can control their victims if they have power over them. And so the last is probably the hardest and most common within the state of South Dakota. South Dakota has 3 of the poorest counties in the United States located here in South Dakota with our reservations. When you have poverty levels like that, you have vulnerability. You have what people call survival sex for family members. And familiar trafficking is individuals that traffic their own family members. Mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles. We know it's happening in systems. We know it's happening on the reservations. It's probably the hardest to identify because they are groomed and they are groomed by their own family member. Introduced to pornography, introduced to alcohol, sexually abused. That's all part of the grooming process for familiar trafficking. And so when these kids are 7, 8 years old and they begin to traffic them, sex traffic them, labor traffic them, basically what they do is they don't know if this is good or bad because this is what the person they trust introduced them to. And so they're groomed to not know any different. And so we get a lot of individuals who walk through our doors later in life that they start identifying as we start talking that this was trafficking. Your family member groomed you to traffic you, but you thought you could trust them, and this was just normal behavior. And so familiar trafficking is one that we're really focusing on in some legislation coming up and some of our efforts moving forward, because a lot of victims, there's not a lot of intervention, and we need to intervene on these youth and get them out instead of getting them as adults. And that mental health and those addictions and those trauma are so deep rooted that it's hard for them to move forward with their life. And so intervention really needs to happen with this familiar trafficking. So a lot of people say it's not happening in South Dakota. I'm here to tell you that it is. Labor trafficking is also happening. Our vulnerable populations where we're seeing it now is more the labor trafficking is in the immigration population. In immigration populations, you have a lot of deportation, sending them across lines, bringing them over, and they're vulnerable. They have the language barrier. You have promises that are not kept when they bring them over on temporary visas, and then they begin to facilitate labor trafficking. And it's very hard to identify because a lot of the individuals they bring on the immigration side don't know the language, they don't know the culture, so they don't know what is happening to them is wrong, because the only person they have is their trafficker, who is their interpreter and the person who houses them and provides for them. And it gets very difficult for a labor trafficking victim to get out of those circumstances because they control every aspect of their life. And then once they get them over here on the immigration side, then they'll introduce them to addictions. They'll introduce them to getting fake IDs, so they have a felony, so they get deported. We have all of these vulnerabilities within our systems that creates this facilitation of labor trafficking. And so South Dakota is not immune to labor trafficking either. We like to talk a lot about sex trafficking, but we also need to talk about both. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit somebody for either labor or sex, and both of those are human trafficking.
Thank you for that. That was a lot to soak in, but I think it's important that you're right. Those of us here in the Midwest, here in South Dakota, we do want to believe in the good of the people
Yes.
around us. And so, I don't doubt anything you say. And it's one of those things that until we are aware of a problem, what we don't know, what we don't know.
Yeah. Out of sight, out of mind, right? It's hidden in plain. We call this crime hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
Because it's happening within our communities, but most people, like you said, I don't want to believe that happens because it's so horrific, or they haven't been educated to identify it. And when they do, what do I do with it? How do I report, and how do I intervene? And so it's a very horrific topic. It is not selling of cocaine, it is not selling of heroin, it is selling of human beings who should have value, but they've become a commodity, and that's not the way that God designed it to be.
So, my whole message is that we are all created for a purpose.
Yeah.
And God brings us to our purpose through the different things that he leads us to through our life. And we can either have the courage to say, okay, I'm in, let's go do this. Or we can shrink back and say, I'm not worthy. And one of the things that you said earlier that I really loved was that, once you got into this particular activity and helping, God equipped you and has brought everything you've needed to make this happen. And that's such a beautiful message, because I think until we learn to trust that he is taking us and he will equip us, we have a tendency to hold back. And what was running through my mind as you were explaining all of this is that if we could get the message out, like you said, to the young people before, and help them realize how valuable they are, and that they have the choice to say no, and they have the power to, learn when it's time, when it's safe to move forward, and when it's not. You can change all of this. We can change all of this as a society. So that's really an important message, I think. So, without trying to solve all the problems of the world, which is really tempting to want to say, well, let's do.
I know, right? Yeah, every day it's very tempting.
Right.
Yeah, but God got nothing, and God is impossible. Nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing.
But what I want to know is, I do want to shift just a little bit and talk about what kinds. I talk about God. I talk a lot about back in the Israelites, and when he led them through the desert and crossed the Jordan into the promised land and all of that. And at that time, he gave them the manna that they needed to survive and to get to where they needed to be. And so what were your breadcrumbs? What were the things that now when you look back, you're like, oh yeah, that was preparing me for this all my life?
Yeah. I think in retrospect, I'm fairly a new Christian to a lot of people. I've been walking and really walking with the Lord for about 13 years. And as soon as I went through some things in my life and found my relationship, or he found me, however you want to say that, he started to direct my steps. It was just amazing how quickly it happened, because I didn't step into the call early in life. I always felt in my heart, I'm called for something different. I didn't know what that looked like. But as soon as I started my relationship with Jesus Christ, he began to direct my steps. And I was working in television, and as soon as I was just like, I commit my life to you, Christ, and all of a sudden, random things started happening in my life, in the sense of I ended up in nonprofit. And so I spent 7 years in a nonprofit that I helped do the marketing and development for, and also worked with survivors through that nonprofit. So they had addiction services, they had counseling services, they had youth services, they had all these plethora of services, and I got to work with these different survivors to share their story. But I also did a program called Street Outreach. So I'd wear a yellow coat and I would go out into the community and I'd reach out to homeless youth. I did that for 2 years. And I just watched this path of, and then the Lord's like, you're done with that. And I'm like, and honestly, about 6 years ago, I thought I was opening a home of restoration for survivors. And I'm so grateful that he redirected my steps into ministry. I quit my job. I was a faith girl. I was ready to step out and do this for God. And he's like, well, I can appreciate that. You're just not quite ready. And I spent 3 years in ministry, and I worked in pastoral care. I was a minister on pastoral care. I started doing all the outreach. So any vulnerable that would come through the church, I would work with and connect with. And the first survivor we worked with actually came through the church that I worked for before I even started this work. And so God was just directing my steps. And when that ministry time came to an end, where I obviously he felt I had learned everything I needed to learn at that season. And I stopped, I went back into television, and I knew that I needed a break. And I knew that human trafficking, to combat, be an anti-human trafficking, was still in my heart. I just didn't know what it looked like. And I think sometimes we get so excited about the vision of God that, we step out in faith before God has called us to do that. And I am completely guilty of that. But in the sense of then I was always so open to him redirecting me when I realized that maybe I was a little before my time. And when I was in prayer in August of 2015, God put in my heart again to get involved with anti-human trafficking. And so first thing I did, I learned from my mistakes from before. I went to my pastor and I said, what should be my next steps? And my pastor told me, find the foundation that's already laid. And I said, okay. So I Googled what everybody does. You Google anti-human trafficking or human trafficking in South Dakota. And a luncheon for a human trafficking group popped up, and I ended up attending that luncheon. And that organization was Call to Freedom, which was at this time a ministry under a program under a different ministry. And so it was under Tapestry International. And so I started working with them. I was on their board. I started just really defining what does human trafficking look like, getting my feet wet, just learning and serving wherever I could serve. And I went to Sturgis, South Dakota in August of 2015 that forever changed my life. I had an encounter with a young girl named Marissa, and it was on an outreach that we were doing at that time. And I learned later that she was a trafficking victim that had been recovered and then later was pulled back into human trafficking. So she was out for less than a year, and she was re-recruited. And I started asking the questions, how do you identify a victim and how do you lose them? And they began to tell me that 298 beds across the United States were for women coming out of human trafficking at that time, and only a handful for boys that were specialized. And there were so many gaps in services that they remained vulnerable and they were re-recruited. And I didn't know what God was telling me at that time. And so I went to the woman that I was serving under for the Call to Freedom program. Long story short, she said, I feel like God's calling me for you to take over Call to Freedom. And I was like, what? Like, I did not see that coming. And I went back and I prayed, and God downloaded this entire vision. Not the entire vision, part of the vision that we're in today, because I know he's always evolving that. And so I stepped out in faith. I knew that I was supposed to take this, but I knew I needed a paycheck. And so I applied for our 501c3 because it was not a formal nonprofit at the time. In November of 2015, we got accepted January of 2016, and I worked 2 jobs for a year and 4 months. God graced me in that process. I have so many divine stories. I got to narrow it down. But the entire process, he graced me in my current job. I was still successful in my current job, with the fact that gave me so much freedom to do Call to Freedom. And I'm so grateful for that journey, because coming out of that journey and having to work 2 jobs and to really just value what we have today. I think sometimes if we jump right into a call and we don't have all of this history behind it and hardship behind it, you lose the value of what you have. And so today, we started with 10 hours a week, 2 volunteer staff, and transitioned full time in 2017. And now we have 15 staff that we employ. We just integrated into domestic violence shelters, 4 domestic violence shelters that we are going to have positions in, so we can better equip communities to respond to human trafficking. And I have so many stories of the grace of God, that the timing of your call is so perfect. It has to be perfect, because there's a lot of times that we step into our calling and we're forcing it. It was completely different when I stepped in and God was opening the door for me to walk in it. And as I've walked in my call, there has been this favor and this grace upon what we do at Call to Freedom that I could never orchestrate. And it's only by the hand of God that we've served now 272 victims of human trafficking. And we've trained over 20,000 people in the course of the last, last year, 3.5 years, to having a housing project, not knowing where I was going to get the funding for that, to now getting another grant that we're going to be expanding into tribal communities and doing youth services as well to better protect those. And that is only God. And the right legislator person shows up, or the right donor shows up, or, and a service provider, it never fails. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. That's there were a couple of things that you said that really I think are important to come back and focus on. And one is way back at the beginning of your story, when you were talking about it didn't really start to come together until you developed a relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us who call ourselves Christians. We are Christians. I don't mean to take away from that, but we're kind of just going through the motions. We're sitting in church on Sunday morning, and we're volunteering for the different things that they ask us to raise our hand for, and we're doing it, but we haven't really, like you said, just opened our hands and said, I'm here, Lord. Show me where you want me to serve. Let's get to know each other. Let's develop a real relationship, and that is huge.
It is. I think the biggest thing I would tell to Christians that feel like they're called, and everybody's called to something, right? It just looks different, right? Is that just to get in and serve. I think sometimes we just want to step into these positions right away. And I have learned, if I would have stepped into this position 6 years ago, I would never have been equipped, nor would I have been successful. And I'm so grateful that I didn't, but that I needed to be developed as a Christian. And so how do you do that? You get that through serving. You serve, and you learn to submit to other authority, to learn from them. The Bible says, faithful over least, I'll make you ruler over much, right? And so wherever God is calling you right now, to learn to be faithful to that period and that season, and to where God has called you at that time. Because if you are faithful to it, not perfect, but faithful to it, God will then trust you with more. And that has really been our journey. Is I think the last 3.5 years have been great, but they also have been very difficult, in the sense of God has really developed me as a leader. That if you're called to lead, what character do you have? What do you possess that is Christ-like? And how do you represent him well? So now I have an opportunity to represent Christ. And one of the things I always talk to, especially to my staff, is the women that come through the door have had horrific things happen to them. So they're very angry with God, or they have spiritual abuse has been used against them. So I said, we're not to talk it, we're to walk it. Right. We are the example of Jesus Christ to them. And when they're ready to say, what's different about you? Why is there unconditional love? Why is there mercy? Then it gives us an opportunity to talk about him. But we're invited to do that. And I think that is one of the things I would say is, as leaders and people that God's calling to positions of any type of leadership, what is our example? Because we can sit in our pews and we can hear it, but what are we doing with what we're hearing? And how do we put it into action? And I think that really is what God looks for when he's promoting people. And I am a work in progress. There's a lot of things that God has said, put at the cross and die to yourself. And we've been through many processes, and we will continue to be through processes because we're imperfect people, right? And so I challenge people in that. I challenge my staff. I am always making this about other people. This isn't about Becky. This isn't about Call to Freedom. This is about community. This is about uniting a community to play a part to combat human trafficking. And we all play a part. And so how do we lift up others versus lifting up ourselves as leaders? And that's a process, and it's an important process for us to leaders to go through and to hopefully land well in. Yeah.
Yes. I love that perspective. And the other thing that I think is really important for people is that wherever we are there for a reason. I mean, whether it's to help someone else through a situation, or to, like you talked about in your journey, we're in certain places just to learn and grow, to prepare you for the next step. And then the other point that you made that I think is so huge, and it's so hard to practice, and that is that when he lays certain heart desires on our heart, it may be for the future and not for today. And not to rush into that. And that's a lesson that I'm learning. I'm in the middle of learning that one right now, because
we will always be learning that, right?
Right.
yeah, for sure.
And you're bringing up a really good point that I think probably holds people back sometimes from stepping into some of these things, beyond just being maybe fearful or doubtful as to whether they have the capability and all of that, but is this idea that I can't do anything until I'm ready. I have all of the tools I need. And he doesn't call us to sit back and wait until we're ready. He calls us to take action. And then, like you said, he equips us for whatever we need to keep, and we don't get to see the whole picture. We just get the next step, and then the next step.
Yeah. I think what I love about the Bible is God put a lot of people in there that were called, but they weren't equipped. Right. And so I was saying this to one of our mentor survivors. I go, God doesn't call the equipped. He graces the call upon your life to equip you. He equips you. He equips you to do these things. And I think more than anything is your character is, I feel in my journey, and I can't speak to others, that my character is more of what God is concerned about in what I do. But fear has never been a factor for me.
I don't doubt that.
Fear. Yeah, no, not at all. God didn't give me a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and sound mind, right? And but I'm a doer. I'm a very passionate person. And so how do you take all of those beautiful gifts and put them where you just trust in God, right? So how do you effectively trust the Lord in this process? And so a scripture I always lean on is Proverbs 3:5-6, is trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. And I always think, Lord, what am I doing? Does it honor your word? Does it line up with your word? And it's one of my first testers in trusting God. I actually did a word study, and the word hope includes the word trust. You can't hope until you trust something. And when you look up those definitions, I was like, that is really interesting, because if I can't trust, I will never have hope in the word of God. And so how do I build trust? And I would discipline my life in the sense of, okay, God's calling me to forgive this person. Everything in me doesn't want to, right? But I have to trust God that he's told me to forgive them, and that he's going to grace me on the other side. And so a lot of times in our process, it doesn't make any sense in what we're doing or what God's calling us to do. But if we know where we have accountability in our life, that we have asked for confirmations of what God's telling us, right? That could be scripture, that could be trusted people in our life. I put people around me. I have about 3 to 5 people that I trust and that they hold me accountable. And they tell me, Becky, you're off, or that's right on track. And I go to them each individually when I feel like God's calling me something bigger, because sometimes we don't get it all. We don't hear on our own. And so if I'm not hearing it through the Word of God, which I usually do, and if I am hearing it through the Word of God, then I bring it to accountability people and say, this is what I'm hearing. Does this sound right to you? And then we pray about it, right? And then when God says go, I just go, and I don't look back. And if I do it with, I really think, if as Christians, if we do it with that heart, God's going to grace you all day long. We all make mistakes. We all step out in faith and maybe miss it. I gave you examples of when I did, but God's not going to let you fall if you do it with the right intentions. And he's faithful like that, and he is good like that. And so even if you step out and you miss it, it's okay, because God's going to grace you in that process. He's going to just acknowledge the fact that you stepped out. And as long as you're still continuing to hear his voice and follow that voice, we all make mistakes. If we didn't make mistakes, we wouldn't learn.
Something else that struck me as you were talking about all of the people in the Bible that he has equipped to do things. The thing that always stands out for me when you kind of start going through some of the really big names is how imperfect they are.
Right.
It's not like these were people that had, were born true leaders and all of that. I mean, he took them and molded them to be what he needed them to be, whether they were, prostitutes, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good reminder for us that he can work with anything, and we can make the biggest quote mistake, and he'll figure out a way to turn it into good if we just keep trying, as you say.
Yeah. I look at David, and David was the last that was chosen by his dad and the prophet. He was the least likely to be chosen. And you look at Joseph, he got the dream at a very early age, but then he went and told everybody, I got the dream. And then he went into slavery, right? And so it's just, you look at all, and I love that God put their imperfections in the Bible.
Right.
You have to stay there, but he shows you when you're imperfect what's the process to get to that next step from that imperfection, right? And there's so much grace in that. And that's why even with survivors, I say, when I know that God's calling them, I can feel it. It's one of my giftings that I can see things in people, and where God will potentially take them. It's their choice if they're going to go there or not. But it's my job to help, guide them in that way, and hopefully develop them with the help of God. And I always say to them, your past doesn't define your future. It doesn't. But God can take your ashes and make it into beauty. And he can take your past to help somebody else for something greater. And that's what I love about this. And this is what I love about what God does in people's lives, is that he sees people fearfully and wonderfully made, even though they don't see that themselves, or the people that were in their lives didn't say that about them. He can take that and he can create a new identity in people.
Amen.
Amen. We're both kind of preaching here, aren't we?
Yeah. No, this is just, it truly is, covers all of the spectrum of my living your more. It doesn't matter where you start from. God can take it and he can build it into something to help further his kingdom. And really that's what it's all about.
Yeah. And the enemy wants to lie to you. He wants to tell you that you will never be anything more. And he will pull out every tactic to make sure you never fulfill your destiny. And one of the things that we always talk about is what you keep inside of you, if you don't bring it out into the light in safe places, you don't just bring it out, but in safe places you bring it to light, you can never get healed of it. And so in that, the enemy likes to keep you in isolation and keep people in their thought life and keep them in, some depression, oppression, whatever that is. And when you begin to expose those and identify those things in your life, that's when God can bring healing in safe areas. And I think there's just so much value in that we all are created for more. We're all created for some purpose and destiny. And here's how I live my life. As soon as I found Jesus Christ, I said, you know what? I've messed up for this many years. I don't plan on making a pattern of that. So let's break that pattern. And when we did, I was just like, I always think of it this way. I'm going to stand in front of Christ one day, and I'm going to stand in the judgment seat. And I think I'm going to have two reels. This is what your life was supposed to be that I called you to, and this is the life that you lived. And my goal and my hope is that my two reels mesh, that I fulfill everything that God has called me to do. Not that it's any more, not any less, just perfectly what He called me to do. And that's my goal in life. And as long as I remain teachable and humble and open to that, I think I'm really excited to see what God's going to do through Call to Freedom and what He has in our life.
Well, I just love that throughout your journey, you were open to the fact that I'm on this path, I'm doing this thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, you want me to go over here now? Okay, let's do it. And I think that's just simply beautiful, because He does have us, leads us to wherever He needs us at the moment. And Call to Freedom may just be another stepping stone to something entirely different for you.
That's right. And I'm open to that. I figure if that is the case, I need to do a really good job of pouring into my staff now, so that God can prepare, if He is preparing me for another level or something different, that I've already equipped and laid the foundation here. And I want to always do things with excellence. And I think sometimes we can get really busy, right? And lose perspective of that. I think we're all guilty of that, including myself. But my job is that, I take my leadership and I say my 20%, I pour into them so they can pour into the 80%. And so how do I duplicate what God is doing in my life, that this is the vision into those that are underneath me? And I think that's so important, because I think as leaders, we miss that. We get so focused on what we're doing out in the community or what we're doing here. And I was guilty of that a year and a half ago. And God said, no, I'm calling you here to pour into them so I can do something greater on a greater capacity. And, as soon as I got that, literally that year and a half, when that change came to me as a leader and I heard God's voice and I heeded to it, we were at 3 staff at the time, and now we're at 15 within a year. This amazing growth came, and it all stemmed from me as a leader. It stemmed as, are you ready to handle what I'm about ready to give you as a leader? If you're not, this is all I'm going to give you. And as soon as I heard that and I heeded to that, and I'm still in a process with that, this amazing growth came. And I go, oh, I get it. I get it. Like, it's about developing me and me being faithful to where you're calling me to right now. Because anti-human trafficking, a lot of people can use it as platforms. And I said to the Lord, I never want this to be a platform for me. I want this so that I'm faithful. Even if you called me to 10 people, am I faithful to those 10 people? And not losing sight of what God has really called me to. And if He does call me to greater, great. I look forward to the journey. If He says, Becky, you just stay here and do what you're doing, then I'm going to be okay with that. There's something about stepping into your call and purpose that gives you a joy and a contentment and a peace that you can't find when you try to search for it on your own. And that's where I'm at right now. And I'm just really excited. And I'm very much about wanting to make sure that we help as many people as we can, and that we're making as much change as we can for others that are stepping into what we're doing in the future.
Yeah, and I love the fact that your calling isn't just to serve the victims, the survivors. Your calling is also to equip the people that He's brought into your team so that they will be able to fulfill whatever their calling is. And that's what's so cool, is it doesn't matter where we are. We have a purpose, and we can serve, whether it's a stay-at-home mom and raising those babies to be the best people they can be, or the leader of a huge corporation or anything in between. There's a purpose for where we are, and truly it's all about helping everyone develop that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
This
Yeah,
is
I'm so grateful for my relationship with God. There are many times I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not equipped to do that. And or I just frankly don't want to do it. But I'm just like, you're always right. You've never failed me. I may have failed you, but you've never failed. And one of these things, even when my staff comes in, they have a family loss or somebody's sick or they have struggles in their life. I go, and one thing I tell you, God is faithful. He is faithful, and he is faithful. No matter if you can see it, feel it, he is always faithful, and he's working behind the scenes in his faithfulness to interact. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how he's going to play it out. But the one thing you can hold on to is his faithfulness. And he has been faithful to what we're doing at Call to Freedom, and we're not stopping. As long as we're faithful to the call. My goal is that not just 3% of victims are ever identified, but 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, to a point where we get to 100%, that we create infrastructures that protect the most vulnerable within our communities, be it our youth, our tribal communities, to adults, addictions, vulnerable families. We have the ability to make change. And we can't be limited by systems, because God has never been limited by systems, ever. And so we are not going to be limited by systems. And I think people want to be a part of something like that. They want to be a part of a positive change that changes lives for the glory of God. And so we all have that ability wherever we're at. If it's a school teacher, I can't tell you how many school teachers that victims have come in and they've talked about a teacher who's made an impact in their life over the course of the year, to a law enforcement person who handed them a card that they just knew somebody actually cared about them, to somebody who's in a gas station who said the right word at the right time because they listened to the voice of God. They remember those things. And sometimes we don't see the fruit of them, but it makes an impact that someday when we stand before God, that I'm sure he'll tell us. And until then, we just have to be faithful where we're at and what we're doing.
I love this. Thank you so much.
Sorry if I'm preaching, y'all.
No, it's so beautiful, and we could go on forever. So we've talked about your verse. You've already brought that forward, and clearly you've given us the story of how you were longing for more and you stepped into that. What if there's someone listening today who is feeling the draw to help in some way, to get involved? How can they do that? What would that look like for them if they wanted to help with the Call to Freedom or something like that?
Sure. Yeah, we've tried to make that very easy. Honestly, that's one of the first things the Lord said to me when I started this call. He said, "Unite a community." And I'm like, "Lord, I don't even know how to do that." And I'm watching that happen. I am watching God use people's gifts and talents to make a difference in this initiative, this social injustice. And so we've created ways within the organization for people to use their skills to make a difference. So you can go online to calltofreedom.org and go under how to get involved, or the volunteer area, and fill out a form. And a lovely woman named Ruth will give you a call or make a connection with you via email to see what your passion is. So we have people who serve on our security team. We have people who go grocery shopping. We have people that, after they've served with us a period of time, become mentors potentially to the women, to people who come in and do administration for us. We have individuals who chair our events. We've created all of these positions for different people because they didn't know how they could get involved and make a difference. And so if you are hairdressers, we work with hairdressers within the community, nail artists who want to just make the women feel beautiful. So when the women come in, we connect them and we have a process in place. You name it, we can plug people in. We have volunteer attorneys. We need attorneys right now. If you have a skill for attorneys, the women need to be represented. Whatever your skill is, we can definitely put it to use. So just visit our website, and then we'll get back to you on what that looks like as well.
That is so wonderful. And what I love about that is that you are allowing people to step forward. I mean, there's a place for everybody, regardless of what their gift is. And that's really what life is there's a place for everybody, regardless of what our gift is. We just need to find what brings us to life and what makes us feel complete and fulfilled.
That's one of the first questions I say, what is your passion?
Yeah.
And I want to get involved. And I'm like, well, tell me what your passion is. And there's been times where I've seen passion. I felt like God has led us, and we've created new positions specifically for people because they're part of the solution. And it's just amazing. Like, we have so many volunteers doing so many different things, but they love it because you're exactly right. It's their passion. It's their gift. It's something that they can bring to the table, that they know they're good at, and they're very passionate about, and it ignites something in a community that nothing else can. Everybody wants to have purpose. Everybody wants to have value. How do we ignite that in people? And that's finding their passion.
Right. I love it. Thank you so much. I just feel so blessed that we happened to be in the same room that night that the lights went off.
I know, right? How random is that?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I've done television, I've done live shows. This is my first podcast. So thank you so much for having me on. And nothing gets me more excited to be able to meet amazing people like yourself that have a heart to pour into other people. So thank you for what you do.
And thank you. You are definitely making a difference in the world, and I'm honored to be able to relay your story and help others see that it can be done if we just trust and have hope and move forward. So I just want to thank you so much, Becky, for joining me today. This has been so beautiful and so helpful. I think we all need to hear this, regardless of whether it becomes a passion or a mission for us. We need to understand that this is a reality in the world that we live in today. And even if we can just make a phone call, if we see something that makes us question if it's right, we need to take that step. So thank you so much for sharing this. It's been beautiful.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for stopping by and listening today, and for staying with us. This was a longer episode than we usually have here, but it's such an important message, and it's one there really was so many important topics discussed that I really couldn't cut any one of them out. So again, thank you for listening. If you know of someone who, actually, I don't know of anybody who doesn't need to know about this important message, so please share it with the people in your life. We all need to be aware of this atrocity that's happening right below our very eyes, and we need to help make a difference in this area. So thank you so much for stopping by. If, again, you're interested and you've heard this early enough that you could come join us for our retreat, I would love to help you connect with your more. Again, you can find that at vannajohnson.com/retreat. If you want to connect with Becky and the beautiful work that she's doing, you can find her on Facebook, and you can also just go to Call to Freedom in the internet. I will put a link in the show notes. Thank you so much again. Have an amazing day. Go be blessed and live your more.